Every town has its ghosts. In Elmsfield, Pennsylvania, one sat silently under the old oak tree at the end of Main Street. 82-year-old William Bill Harris wasn't there for the parade. Not really. For him, Memorial Day wasn't about music or speeches. It was about faces. Names he remembered when no one else did. Faces of young men who never came home. Dressed in his faded Marine Corps dress blues, Bill rolled his worn wheelchair into the shade before anyone arrived. His once powerful frame had withered from age and illness, but the uniform still sat proudly on his shoulders. His medals, Silver Star Purple Heart, and ribbons worn thin, gleamed softly in the morning sun. Medals no one in Elmsfield even knew he owned. Because Bill had never told his story, not once in 60 years. He had chosen silence, carrying the burden of heroism like a secret. The memories of the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, the brutal Korean snows, and the 17 lives he saved were locked away like the medals in his closet. But that morning, fate decided his story wouldn't die with him. As the parade began, Bill watched the world pass him by the fire trucks, the politicians, the marching band. His heart stayed steady, detached, until he heard the boots. 47 Marines marched in perfect formation, their faces young, their steps precise. Bill watched them through eyes that had once looked just like theirs. He should have been invisible to them. He always was. Until Sergeant Maria Santos saw him. Her sharp eyes flicked toward the old man beneath the oak. Something about the way Bill sat there silent but unbroken, his uniform battered but proudly worn, made her stop. And then she did something no one expected. Eyes right. Salute. 47 Marines turned as one. The parade halted. Silence swallowed Main Street. Bill's breath caught in his throat. He trembled, not from weakness, but from something deeper, disbelief. In that moment, William Bill Harris was no longer a forgotten old man. He was a Marine, and every soul in Elmsfield watched in stunned silence as an entire unit saluted the ghost beneath the oak tree. The silence on Main Street felt heavier than gunfire. For a long moment, William Bill Harris could only stare at the 47 Marines standing before him. Their rifles were shouldered, their backs were straight, their faces young yet solemn were locked in crisp salutes, and all of it for him. Bill's weathered hands trembled as he raised his right arm, struggling to return their salute. Tears blurred his vision as the memories he had buried for 6 decades surged back without mercy. He saw snow, not the gentle snowfall of Pennsylvania winters, but the merciless, blinding storm of the Chosin Reservoir. He felt the weight of wounded men on his back, the sting of gunfire and frozen air, the screams that never truly left his ears. Sergeant Maria Santos broke formation, first stepping out and kneeling beside him. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Sir, we don't know your story, but we know a Marine when we see one. Thank you for your service." Bill's voice was little more than a whisper. "Thank you for remembering us old-timers." It should have ended there. A small act of respect, a private moment in the midst of a public parade, but someone else in the crowd had recognized him. Colonel James Matthews, retired, had been standing among the spectators, his grandchildren beside him. The salute had caught his attention. The old man in the wheelchair, even more so. Something about the face, the sharp blue eyes dulled by age, yet burning with unspoken stories, felt familiar. And then memory struck. Matthews pushed through the gathering crowd without hesitation, his own heart pounding as he approached the man he'd spent years searching for. "Sir, are you William Harris?" he asked quietly, kneeling down beside the wheelchair. Bill blinked, his mind overwhelmed. "Yes, I'm Bill Harris." Matthews' eyes filled with tears. His voice broke. "Corporal William Harris, 1st Marine Division, Chosin Reservoir." Bill's face shifted from confusion to something far older. Pain. Memory. I was. Matthews reached for the old Marine's frail hand, gripping it tight. "You carried my father out of that hell." Bill stiffened. Matthews forced himself to continue. "Lieutenant Robert Matthews, Charlie Company. He told us about you for years, said you refused to leave him behind, carried him 2 miles under enemy fire. He said he owed every day of his life to the quiet corporal who never said a word after the war." "That was you." The name cut through Bill's soul like a blade. "Bobby Matthews." Matthews nodded. He died 5 years ago, but he never stopped searching for you. He wanted to thank you properly. And today, sir, so do I." By now, the crowd had gathered tighter around the scene. Spectators, Marines, reporters, everyone stood frozen, witnessing something far greater than a parade. A local news reporter, Jennifer Walsh, stepped forward hesitantly with her camera crew, unsure whether to film the unfolding moment. Sergeant Santos made the decision for her. "Roll the cameras," she whispered. "People need to see this." Matthews slowly stood, addressing the crowd, now forming a respectful circle around Bill. "This man sitting in this wheelchair," Matthews began, voice trembling yet strong, "is Corporal William Bill Harris of the 1st Marine Division. He served in Korea. He fought at the Chosin Reservoir. And he didn't just fight, he saved 17 Marines. 17. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Several Marines instinctively stood at attention. Matthews continued. "When the Chinese army encircled our forces, Bill carried wounded brothers through snow and bullets refusing to leave a single man behind. He earned a silver star, a Purple Heart, but he never told anyone. He hid it. For 60 years. Bill tried to speak, but emotion choked his voice. "I'm not a hero." "Yes, you are," Matthews said firmly, his voice cracking. "You are." The town of Elmsfield, Pennsylvania. Population 8,000 stood silent as Matthews recounted the forgotten history of a man who had lived among them as a recluse, invisible, in plain sight. Veterans saluted, mothers clutched their children, Marines wiped tears from their cheeks. Even Bill's stubborn walls began to crumble. With Jennifer Walsh's microphone thrust gently toward him, Bill finally spoke, not as the silent old man, but as a Marine. "I didn't save them to get medals," he said softly. "I did it because they were my brothers. I just wanted them to go home." Santos knelt again beside him, tears in her eyes. "And thanks to you, they did." Bill looked around, his heart aching under the weight of decades. "I didn't want people to remember me. I wanted them to remember the ones who didn't make it home." A long silence followed. Then one by one, people stepped forward, not for an interview, not for a photograph, but to shake his hand. Veterans from every war, children, strangers, and finally, Sergeant Santos spoke on behalf of every Marine present. "We remember them, sir, but today, we remember you too." The Marine formation reassembled. At Sergeant Santos's command, they stood at attention one last time. 47 salutes were rendered to Corporal William Harris, the silent hero of Chosin Reservoir, and this time Bill Harris returned the salute without trembling. For the first time in 60 years, he understood he wasn't forgotten anymore. He was finally home. The morning after the parade, William Bill Harris woke to the sound of knocking on his front door. For decades, his house had been a place of silence, forgotten by neighbors, avoided by children who saw him as just another old man. But today, Elmsfield remembered him. At first, Bill hesitated, unsure whether to answer. He hadn't invited visitors in years, but when he finally cracked open the door, Sergeant Maria Santos stood there in full uniform, holding a stack of handwritten letters from school children. "Permission to visit, sir?" she asked softly. Bill, overwhelmed, nodded. That first visit marked the beginning of a transformation neither he nor Elmsfield could have predicted. Word of the Marines' tribute and Colonel Matthews' revelation had spread across town overnight. By the afternoon, local reporters were knocking gently, asking for interviews. Veterans arrived from neighboring counties, simply hoping to shake the hand of the man who had carried wounded Marines through the frozen hell of Chosin Reservoir. Families stopped by bringing pies, meals, small gifts, not out of charity, but respect. Bill Harris, who had once been invisible, was now Elmsfield's most honored resident. At first he resisted. Sitting in his modest living room, staring at his unopened Silver Star citation, Bill whispered to Santos during one of her early visits, "I'm no hero." But Sergeant Santos, along with Colonel Matthews, who soon joined her, refused to let him fade back into silence. "You're not being honored instead of the fallen." "Bill," Matthews said quietly one evening, "you're being honored because of them." Slowly, Bill began to open up. Each story, pried from years of self-imposed silence, carried weight. He spoke of the night marches through enemy lines, the men he'd lost, the faces he still saw in his dreams. He described the bitter cold of Chosin, the frostbite, the starvation, the fear, but also the brotherhood that had carried them all forward. "I wasn't brave," he said once, his voice cracking. I was just scared of letting my brothers down. The town listened. Reporters captured every word. Veterans sat silently for hours, some weeping quietly. Children listened wide-eyed as Bill explained that freedom wasn't free, that every parade they enjoyed, every summer they lived, had been bought by someone else's winter. The more he spoke, the stronger his voice became. Though cancer continued to eat away at his body, his spirit, the part of him the war hadn't broken, grew fierce. His small house transformed into a gathering place. Local students from Elmsfield High began visiting regularly as part of a history project rebranded Lessons from Corporal Harris. Bill found purpose in those visits. He saw in the teenagers what he once saw in young Marines' potential: responsibility, hope. In between interviews and visitors, Sergeant Santos kept watch over him, unofficially assigned by the Camp Lejeune detachment to support the town's newest hero. She handled reporters when Bill grew too tired. She coordinated with Matthews to arrange quiet hours when the attention threatened to overwhelm him. One day, as she poured him coffee, Bill asked softly, "Why do you keep coming back?" Sergeant Santos smiled. "Because Marines take care of their own, sir." Bill looked down at his trembling hands. "I'm not much of a Marine anymore." "Begging your pardon," Santos said firmly, "but you're exactly what a Marine should be." As his body weakened, his purpose intensified. He agreed to record his memories not for personal fame, but to create an oral history for future Marines. Colonel Matthews organized the effort, bringing in a military historian to capture Bill's stories, every word, every tear, every moment of silence when words failed. Each session exhausted him. But after each, Bill said the same thing. "Next time, I've got more." The town rallied around him. Meals were delivered daily. Veterans from as far as 3 states arrived just to thank him. The VFW post, which he had avoided for decades, named their hall after him while he was still alive. Bill wept quietly at the ceremony, whispering to Matthews, "I never wanted this." Matthews placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "And that's why you deserve it." Yet despite his newfound purpose, time was merciless. Dr. Sarah Chen, the local physician who had begun making house calls, confirmed what Bill already knew: his time was running out. Cancer had advanced beyond treatment. When Sergeant Santos broke the news, Bill took it in silence. "I've had more time than most." But as days grew shorter and nights colder, Bill refused to surrender to despair. Instead, he pressed harder to finish sharing his story. He told Santos, Matthews, and even Dr. Chen, "If telling this helps even one young Marine know they're not alone, then that's worth every breath I've got left." In those final weeks, Bill Harris found something he had never expected: peace. No longer a ghost haunting his own life, he had become the embodiment of the Corps' most sacred creed: no Marine left behind. Not in life, not in memory. And for the first time in 60 years, as his strength faded, Bill Harris felt something stronger than regret. He felt pride, and he wasn't alone anymore. Bill Harris's small living room had become something between a recording studio and a war room. Not for battles of bullets and bayonets, but for stories, lessons, and the invisible war of memory. His frail frame rested in the old recliner that had seen better days, but his posture, even as cancer drained him, remained that of a Marine. Straight-backed, steady, determined. Colonel James Matthews sat nearby, notebook in hand, watching over the recording equipment. Sergeant Maria Santos stood guard at the door, not out of protocol, but respect. Over the past few weeks, this quiet house had drawn Marines, veterans, historians, and reporters alike. Yet all of them, without fail, deferred to one man, Corporal William Bill Harris. Bill knew he was dying. Dr. Chen had made it clear. Every day was a borrowed gift now, and yet there was no fear in his expression, only purpose. "I've got one last job to finish," he told Santos softly. It was Matthews who had suggested it, a final message. A video to be shown to every future Marine recruit. Bill had hesitated at first, but then he realized something simple, something that weighed heavier than his cancer. "If I don't tell them, who will?" And so the project began. Not for medals, not for history books, but for the next generation. The first recording session was brief. Bill, coughing between sentences, insisted on speaking plainly without script. His voice, raspy yet steady, filled the room. "I'm not going to tell you war's glorious," he began. "It ain't. It's cold. It's loud. It's terrifying. But you don't fight wars for glory. You fight for the man or woman standing next to you. Matthews blinked back emotion as the words poured out. Santos stood motionless, her salute invisible, but understood. Bill paused, catching his breath, then continued. I wasn't brave. Most days I was scared. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you care enough to keep going. Each session drained him. But every morning he insisted on more. Across several days, Bill spoke about loyalty, about sacrifice, about leadership that wasn't about giving orders but sharing burdens. His stories weren't polished speeches. They were raw, honest, and they carried the authority of a man who had carried brothers through snow and fire alike. One afternoon, as the camera rolled, he said something that silenced the entire room. Medals don't make you a hero, neither does killing the enemy. What makes you a hero is caring, even when it costs you. Matthews stopped writing. Santos's jaw tightened. Dr. Chen, watching quietly from the hall, wiped her eyes. Bill Harris, once invisible to his community, had become a teacher to a nation. As days passed, more Marines arrived, veterans, young recruits who had driven hours just to shake his hand or sit quietly during recordings. Bill welcomed them all. His house had been a fortress of silence for decades. Now it pulsed with life. At night, when the sessions ended and visitors left, Bill confided in Matthews. I never thought my story mattered. Matthews shook his head gently. Never mattered more. But time was running out. Dr. Chen estimated that Bill had less than a week. His body was failing, his voice weakening. Yet his mind stayed sharp. He refused to stop the recordings. On what would become the final day of filming, Bill asked for one thing, his dress blues. Santos helped him into the uniform, adjusting medals he'd once hidden in a shoebox. His silver star, his purple heart, his ribbons for campaigns few remembered. When he was ready, he sat before the camera hands, trembling yet steady enough to salute. The room fell silent. Bill looked directly into the lens. This message, he said slowly, is for every Marine who ever doubts if they're good enough. Every recruit who wonders if they belong. Let me tell you, you do. He paused, the weight of decades resting in his voice. Being a Marine isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. Tears glistened in Santos's eyes. Bill's breathing slowed, but he pressed on. It's about loyalty, brotherhood, taking care of each other even when you're scared, especially then. A long silence. Then with effort, he raised his head higher, speaking his last official words to the Corps he loved. Take care of each other. The camera remained fixed as his hand trembled into a final salute. Then Matthews ended the recording. That night, as storm clouds gathered over Elmsfield, the house stayed quiet. Bill, now too weak to speak, drifted between rest and consciousness. Marines came one by one to sit beside him. Sergeant Santos never left his side. In the early morning hours, Dr. Chen whispered what they all feared. It's time. Matthews Santos and a half-dozen Marines from Camp Lejeune stood around his bed as Bill's breath slowed. With his last conscious effort, he reached for Matthews' hand. Did they hear it? He rasped. Matthews, choking back tears, squeezed his hand. They heard Bill. They'll never forget. Bill Harris's final breath came as Santos whispered the Marine Corps hymn softly beside him. He passed as he had lived quietly, with dignity, and among brothers and sisters who finally knew his worth. His final mission was complete, and a nation was listening. After William Bill Harris's passing, his quiet voice reached farther than he'd ever imagined. The video he recorded, simple, unpolished, and honest, was shared across military circles, first, then exploded into national attention. Millions viewed his final message where an old Marine, frail, yet unbroken, told future generations what heroism truly meant. Within weeks, the Marine Corps Commandant issued a formal directive. Bill's video would become required viewing at every boot camp graduation. Recruits standing tall in formation watched the man who once thought himself forgotten remind them of their purpose. Take care of each other. At Bill's funeral, the streets of Elmsfield overflowed. Over 3,000 people. Marines, veterans, civilians lined the procession route. The 47 Marines who once broke formation to honor him led as honorary pallbearers. Colonel James Matthews stood among them, his uniform immaculate, his expression reverent. Sergeant Maria Santos carried the folded flag that draped Bill's casket. The ceremony was broadcast nationwide, a tribute not to medals, but to a life of silent service. But perhaps the truest monument to Bill's legacy stood not in marble, but in action. The Harris Veterans Center opened the following spring, its motto etched in brass above the entrance, "Take care of each other." It became more than a shelter. It became a home, providing counseling, medical support, and career training to thousands of veterans across the country. Bill's name, once hidden behind a quiet life, now represented the spirit of service itself. Every Memorial Day, the tradition continued. Marines from Camp Lejeune marched once more down Elmsfield's Main Street, and when they reached the old oak tree where Bill had once sat alone in his wheelchair, they stopped. The entire formation rendered a silent salute to the empty space, a gesture not just for Bill, but for every unseen hero who had served in silence. His story taught a generation that real strength isn't about battles won or medals earned. It's about compassion, about loyalty, about choosing to lift others, especially when it's hard. Bill Harris showed the world that the greatest heroes often carry their battles inside, and their victories are measured not in headlines, but in lives touched. Let Bill's story remind you. True heroism isn't loud. It's quiet. It's selfless. It's human. If this story moved you, honor Bill Harris today by remembering your own unseen heroes. Share their stories in the comments. And if you believe that real strength comes from lifting others, subscribe to this channel for more real-life inspirations, because sometimes the quietest lives leave the loudest echoes.